natural calamities, national and local leaders and policymakers, as well as leaders in industry, saw the importance of acquiring the anticipatory skills needed to provide the systems and infrastructure, reducing the loss of life and property brought about by these disasters. This Futures Literacy Forum workshop proved so useful that it was soon replicated in other parts of the country and in Southeast Asia. These efforts contributed to the establishment of the Asia-Pacific Foresight Network in 2015, with NWU Phil Foresight as one of the founding members. Hosted by Tamkang University in Taiwan, the conference was attended by futurists from the Prime Minister's Office of Singapore, the Prime Minister's Office of Malaysia, the Office of the President of the Republic of Korea, as well as academics from Tamkang University, University of Tehran, University of Sunshine Coast in Australia, Tokyo University, and the University of Hawaii. Back in the Philippines, NWU Phil Foresight continued to seek other avenues of using the futures and anticipatory thinking for the advancement of different advocacies and the resolution of pressing issues and concerns. NWU Phil Foresight organized an integrative foresight course for women city leaders entitled Transforming Philippine Cities, held at Vegan City, Ilocos, as well as the Future of Food and Water and the World in 2025 at the Casino de Español de Manila. Finally, not to be left behind, Northwestern University has also utilized the futures thinking in crafting its long-term development plan through foresight-driven strategic planning. This has enabled us to effectively communicate the vision of becoming an autonomous world-class educational institution in our part of the globe to our stakeholders and implement our plans towards our desired objectives. With so much to learn and discover, and with so much at stake, it is our hope that futures and anticipatory thinking will become an essential part of all policy and decision-making in the public and private sectors, paving our way to a more secure and ideal future.
Hi, Rio.
Hey.
Good afternoon. So, of course, nothing exists in a vacuum. What led us to the present as far as the UNESCO Chair is concerned?
Well, the UNESCO Chairs was an adventure kind of thing, but it really comes out of the fact that UNESCO is a global laboratory of ideas. And as a global laboratory of ideas, there are nodes, there are places in the universities around the world, and the UNESCO Chairs program has existed for a long time. But when I got to UNESCO in 2012, one of the questions was how to kind of nourish global rethink around future studies and futures thinking. And gradually, one by one, the chairs started to crop up around the world because there was a momentum to rethinking the way we think about the future. And of course, what you're doing is a fantastic example.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity, for Northwestern University way back in 2013, wherein we started testing some of the futures literacy lab designs. And then we've been able to figure out in the process what works, as far as democratizing futures literacy is concerned, and then learned about really that, futures literacy is about developing that competency and the ability to use the future in the present.
The Philippines is a very, very good example of how UNESCO collaborates on the ground with different organizations and agencies. We did work with private sector, foundations, with the government, and by working together with different parts of the society, you create this relationship to the universities and to the global United Nations system that's really, really rich. And it's that richness that provides the basis for cultivating this capability. Because futures literacy demands, as you know, a back and forth between what people have in their minds, where their imagination comes from, the different sources of their imagined futures, and then how to make sense of all that. And so it's really a perfect theory and practice relationship that the universities can carry, and the University UNESCO chairs are really a wonderful expression of that.
Yes, and of course I would like to thank you as well, right, for collaborating and partnering with you, and of course with your support as far as Northwestern University's application for the UNESCO Chair. We got the approval recently, and then we are launching this month And thank you very much, Riel, for the support.
I look forward to the
over the
projects
years.
together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
So good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of the Northwestern University and the Philippine Center for Foresight Education and Innovation Research Institute at Northwestern University, Laoag City, Philippines, it is my great honor as its director to welcome all of you to today's UNESCO Chair Talk. So this session is particularly timely around the world as we are witnessing how corruption, economic crime, and geopolitical pressures no longer operate in isolation. And we are privileged today to hear from a distinguished scholar, analyst, and strategist who has advised governments, global institutions like the International Monetary Fund, and who continues to shape foresight conversations through his leadership at the South Asia Foresight Network. And at this point, so it is my honor to introduce our moderator for this session as he will introduce our speaker and the details about our UNESCO chair in the Philippines. So he is leading global futures and the UNESCO chair for Anticipatory Governance and Regenerative Cities here in the Philippines at Northwestern University. He's also the Chief Futurist and CEO of the Center for Engaged Foresight, Chair of the Millennium Project Philippines, and has long been a driving force in advancing foresight practice both locally and internationally. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Shermon Cruz, the UNESCO Chair on Anticipatory Governance and Regenerative Cities, who will formally introduce the UNESCO Chair program and our distinguished guest speaker for today.
Thank you very much, Jasriel, for that wonderful and kind introduction. So let me just go straight into it. This is our inaugural UNESCO Chair Talks, where we invite, leading futures thinkers and practitioners, to discuss critical issues of the day. And the UNESCO Chair Talks series aims to particularly, in fact, actually do that. So today's session will be on economic crime and geopolitical index. And as far as I understand, it explores the complex interactions of corruption, of course, without getting into the details, but we know what an economic crime is, like, for example, money laundering, illicit financial flows, and of course, linking that to geopolitical transformations of today. And of course, economic crime is not only a legal or a financial issue. If you come to think about it, it is deeply entangled with governance, democracy, and global power shifts. So today, we've seen this, that there is an increasing geopolitical rivalries between and among nation states, and it gets to intensify further. And my question personally is, how do these economies, like hidden economies, like economic crimes, shape national resilience and international stability? So today's conversation will try to unpack some urgent questions, like, for example, probably this is something that we can have a conversation about later on, is how do economic crimes, from corruption to money laundering, alter geopolitical interest and landscape? And does it affect the trust between nation states? Can we measure and anticipate risk posed by economic crime, through the ECGI? And given the fact that our speaker has a strong background in futures and in foresight work, applied foresight in particular, what role can foresight play in helping nations and regions prepare for the cascading impacts of financial crime and political instability? And last but not the least, I think this is very critical and important, is that how can we imagine futures? Like, what does it look like when transparency, accountability, and anticipatory governance reduce the systemic risk of economic crime? And here, the economic crime and geopolitical index, I believe, weaves all of these ideas together. And our speaker and the dialogue that we will be having later on, offers us an opportunity to better understand how we can, in fact, actually understand this better. Particularly the intersection, of all these three variables, and help us achieve, give us the capability, hopefully, in our quest for a stable, just, and resilient geopolitical order. So our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Asanga Abeyagoonasekera. And he is currently the Senior Fellow and Executive Director of the South Asia Foresight Network, and also a member of the Millennium Project, Washington, D.C. So Asanga is a Sri Lankan geopolitical and security analyst with deep expertise in international affairs, South Asian geopolitics, and and security analyst, particularly, yes, of course, in global governance. He has advised governments and have written extensively on regional security, and authored, several articles, reports that examines democratic institutions, corruptions, and power struggles in the region. As one of the leading foresight practitioner in South Asia, he provides us a sharp analysis. If you get to read this analysis and reports, you can check his work on Google about how global trends, from authoritarianism to economic crime, can reshape democratic futures and our regional stability. Without further ado, I would like to bring in Dr. Asanga. Dr. Asanga, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sherman. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction. Really honored to be in your program, so thank you. If I may, I have some slides which I would like to open up, so can I share it with you? Are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So again, let me sort of straight away go to this topic, economic crime and geopolitics index. So why we created, what are the reasons behind it? What you see in this image, all the uprisings that starting from Sri Lanka in 2022, Bangladesh, and Nepal, which happened basically a month ago. So what you see is significant, people's anger. You call it the Gen Z protest, or the the protest that's happening even in Indonesia, Philippines, all these places. So even now, when you take the mainstream media, such as the newspaper that I'm holding today, the Philippines newspaper here, today's paper. So basically highlights from the lead story to basically on corruption, on economic crime as the biggest issue, such as the resignation of the Blue Ribbon Chair, Laxon's resignation, to basically the flood probe, which President Marcos has made some serious comments on why we need to investigate on the economic crime, as well as the corruption in Philippines. So what you see is governments, civil society actors, you see general public, you see youth activists speaking about corruption. So the last 4 days in Manila, I have been speaking with all these, most of these stakeholders who are right in front of this corruption fight. And I've managed to gather their perspective on the importance of an economic crime, as well as the geopolitics index. Do we really require this sort of an index? So basically, to the beginning of this economic crimes geopolitics index, the idea was conceived at the 42nd Economic Crime Symposium at the Cambridge University in the United Kingdom this year in September. So I attended this conference, the 42nd Economic Crime Symposium at the Jesus College. And for the last 10 years, if you look at it, I've participated in this Economic Crime Symposium. There are large number of participants from around the world, Interpol to for basically regulators to financial institute, FIUs, intelligence units from various countries. So this year was about more than 700 participants. So each year we gather and we discuss how do we fight corruption in these countries, and what are the measures, what are the tools, how do we how do we synergize regions together, South Asia, Southeast Asia. So all this is discussed at the Cambridge University. This year, we brought in the topic of geopolitics into the agenda, how economic crime and geopolitics interplay. Is there a connection and all that? So we've been kind of discussing this, and the need for an index, basically a risk index, was discussed. And many wanted to see some sort of indication all these countries are going through, such as from ghost projects in the Philippines, which is on paper, but not the physical project is missing. And money has been missing from, basically large amounts of fraud, as well as economic crime, corruption has been a case in the Philippines and many other countries. Ghost airport in Sri Lanka. You had an airport again, but the airport is there, but then again, the flights are not coming in. So kind of unsuccessful projects created without, the due process. So, and in many countries, Bangladesh or Nepal, central bank scandals in Sri Lanka, you have large scandals basically exposed by the general public, media, investigated, still has been investigated by several regimes. So the present regime in Sri Lanka is investigating on that and trying to prosecute. Again, it becomes a challenge when it's cross-border, when it involves extra-jurisdictional, work. So many countries are battling. Flood control, basically the funds in the Philippines is now the topic. So what happened? How do we do it? The president has exposed this. While the committee member has resigned, you can see that. So there's multiple challenges the government is facing, opposition as well as many others. Nepal, Bangladesh, very clear examples. I was there before the crisis happened, 6 months before in Nepal, few months before in Bangladesh. Both the countries rejected when we were speaking that could it be possible that there would be an uprising just like in Sri Lanka. Both the countries, you can see most of those discussions were recorded and on the record. So you can see the government officials, the military, they were saying, no, it's impossible. It would never happen in Bangladesh. It would never happen in Nepal. But what happened? It did happen. So you could see the burning of the parliament building. There was deaths, about more than 70 deaths, 1,500 in Bangladesh. So all this has happened a few days ago in Madagascar. Why? The main theme has been economic crime. The presidents have, basically their heads of states have resigned, basically understanding this, saying that their ministers have sort of, been in corruption, they have not done their work properly, or admitting these issues. Then you have the Gen Z revolution sort of thing projected in Nepal. Then whatever the name that is used in this uprisings, corruption has been the main, or the economic crime has been the main factor. So even when I interviewed the people in the Sri Lankan uprising, if you take 10, 8 of them would say yes, corruption. They took our money. We are poor because the elites have robbed us. So economic crime is the center of the sort of the economic crime index we have developed. there's a kind of a behavioral psychology behind this. Basically, I've discussed this afternoon with a Filipino who's a Stanford scholar who's in Manila on the behavioral psychology side of the Gen Z. Why youth of the Gen Z shun corruption, why they see it as a sort of the biggest issue. Is it the inequality? Is it what is behind it? So there's a kind of a area that needs further work, which we are sort of trying to engage. So to understand and forecast what would happen next in terms of the social norms. So basically the index is created with at the Economic Crime and Geopolitics Center in Washington, D.C., but it is an effort by many others basically coming into play. So we want to invite Philippines, Indonesia, so Surabaya University in Indonesia, NBII, Nation Building Institute in Thailand, Center for Policy Governance. So basically inviting everyone to contribute and be part of it. Geopolitics. So first, actually, we thought of leaving geopolitics out of this equation because it's a hard measure. It's quite hard to measure geopolitical influences. But when it comes to countries that have sort of gone through the full cycle of the people's uprising to regime change, to basically establishing new governments, geopolitics has been one of the main concerns of all these countries. So, for example, the significant height of the geopolitical competition between the great powers, United States, China, and India, be it the tariff or be it how it has impacted the daily lives of people, and how the external forces have captured the elites in their country. What I mean by elites is the political elites. Have they captured? What are the measures? Like, how do we sort of what is the percentage of sort of capturability in a country by external forces, from projects, from bribes, from political funding, is a main sort of a variable which we couldn't ignore when we were developing it. So we brought in this. Now Nepal, if you look at the support to the monarchy party from the India, or in Bangladesh, the Prime Minister Hasina was, all these leaders who were ousted blames geopolitics. Sri Lankan case, I interviewed the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So in the Bangladesh case, Hasina saying that the US wanted an island and we didn't give it. So therefore I was removed. In the Sri Lankan case, the former president blamed the United States, who was the main external actor of removing him. So one of the main areas, the geopolitical sort of the influences, how the first families or powerful politicians are sort of entangled with this geopolitical influence is a very interesting. I think it's one of the first efforts ever taken by a think tank to bring in a measure on the geopolitics side. It is very ambitious. It is a very high call. But then I think with the ongoing test data set, we'll be able to develop it. It's an ongoing process, so we want to develop it. I mentioned about the Sri Lankan case. External projects such as the Adani project in Sri Lanka, or the whatever the ghost projects in Philippines, they have any external links, be it the USMCC or other sub-variables. So we try to measure it. So the ECGI, the Economic Crime and Geopolitics Index, has 4 main variables which we look at. The first is the unknown variable, which is the Corruption Perception Index, CPI, which has been a standard measure on understanding how corrupt the nation is, and then how the public perceives corruption, and so it's a perception. We take it in as one of our first variables. The second is the economic crime severity, which captures the prevalence and the intensity of fraud, illicit finance, the anti-money laundering regime in a country, and the financial misconduct, organized crimes in a country, cross-border trade when it comes to the economic crime being cross-border. So all this is measured from the economic crime severity, the second variable. The third is the public response and the intensity. How the public responds basically for the protest, the intensity of protest, how the public respond to government regulations in place, or the policies in place, such as the organic fertilizer crisis that occurred in Sri Lanka, or the Digital Security Act in Bangladesh, or the present the flood, the control issue in Philippines. Public response, intensity, how the youth sort of see this, so that's the third variable. The fourth is the geopolitical influence, the one that I explained earlier. It assesses the impact of regional powers at play. We also take in the location of the country, the geographic location. Philippines scored quite high because of the South China Sea issues, as well as Sri Lanka being the hub in the Indian Ocean. So the geographic location is also taken in the geopolitical variable. So each variable is normalized and weighted to produce a composite of the ECGI, allowing for assessment for risks across the countries. We have only taken the South Asian and the Southeast Asian countries, since it's a test data set right now. We will be having this test data set until December. We collect it from each and every country, and we find sort of independent actors in these countries to contribute and basically improve the data set that's out there. Now, by highlighting the high risk and emerging risks of the nations, a predictive tool for policymakers, it is an important tool for policymakers to understand the political risk of these countries. If you are in the high risk, you are in a very vulnerable place where any sort of uprising could trigger, and then you are in a basically political instability, whilst you're much higher. So it's important to understand this risk index is not only for the politicians or the government, but also for the investors to understand which is the best markets to sort of make the investments also, and also the international different stakeholders, be it IMF, World Bank, or so it's kind of a measure that is being given a risk measure when you compare with the global risk index created by the World Economic Forum. So it gives on various different perspectives on when it comes to climate change, various others. But this one is narrowed to two only, which is economic crime and geopolitics. So basically, the four variables, when we sort of measure the intensity of each and every country, you would see you understood that there is the out of 9 South Asian countries, 3 have gone through the full cycle from regime change to establishing new governments. And we see that several others, high-risk countries, we have identified, and Philippines is basically closer to the high-risk mark, which is 69.2. I will show that in a few minutes from a graph. So basically, the illicit finance, money laundering, and organized crime in a country, how important these measures are. As you know, the traditional CPI index, they don't bring in this sort of holistic measure. We wanted to sort of bring in all these parameters in because we need to understand, okay, what are the corruption scandals in these countries? Because these are the trigger points for the youth to protest, as well as youth to bring in government change. I mean, significant change in the regimes. Illicit financial flows, money laundering has been a serious issue. Anti-money laundering regime that the country is following, as well as the cyber. Now, in the Philippines, yesterday I was discussing on the cyber crimes issue. There's been a large number of cyber crimes. In Cambodia is the same. So also in Thailand. So we try to sort of bring in these measures in. And also organized crime activity in a country, from drug trafficking, human trafficking, sort of arms smuggling. So all this. So ASEAN countries, South Asian countries, very vulnerable on this organized crime activity also. State capture and political financing, basically extent of which politics is influenced by illicit money. So the elite capture, which I discussed. So again, that's a area that we looked at. So we put it to basic. This is the scoring range: 1 to 3, the low severity; 4 to 6, moderate; and 7 to 8 is high. So we try to sort of band them according to the data that is being collected from the field. So Philippines fall in the high severity. It's a score that was at 7, and many other countries was at the high severity. It's not doing really well in our region. And national public response, or the response of the people out there. So we try to measure that by public pressure, how much of protests civil society actors are supporting, NGOs are kind of sustaining these protests, as well as the media freedom in the country. In Bangladesh, thousands of bloggers got arrested. As well, the government's response is also really important. We try to measure it on the public pressure. For example, in Bangladesh, prior to the elections, when we were discussing with academic as well as think tank scholars, they mentioned that we don't need to keep elections. So elections was going to be held, but they have already given up on the elections, knowing the government would not would not be a fair election. So they would know the results prior to the elections, which shows public anger, as well as the youth being sort of really disappointed in the government process. Legal institutional enforcement, judiciary, police, as well as anti-corruption agencies, how they're playing this role, independent role. Are the bribery commissioners or commissioners in charge influence being changed in these countries? How many times have they been changed? What sort of political influence have they been? What are the cases they have been when they were investigating this? What was the reasons behind of getting rid of these people? So these are important measures that we would need to take it in. Political accountability comes from strength of the opposition, as well as reforms and the transparency. So transparency in a country, we look at how accountability matters, as well as how they look at. So if you look at how we measure it is protest intensity and media freedom, civil society strength together, and we calculate the public response like that. The next is the geopolitical influence. The last variable, basically. So we give a sort of 100% scoring in this one, geopolitical influence from 1 to 10. First is the external state presence and investments in that country. For example, the Adani projects in Sri Lanka, or the large-scale Indian projects, or the Chinese projects that are sort of made it a geopolitically influence, a huge influence in that nation. Another I mean, so you could take many examples, be it Cambodia, be it in Bangladesh, or any of these South Asian countries, or Pakistan. So 30% weight is given for that external state presence and investments. The 25% is for the strategic and the maritime location, or the geographic location of the country. So Philippines scored quite high in that, so around 9 on the strategic location, because the location becomes vulnerable also for certain nations who are sort of navigating the big powers or the big power rivalries of the region. External economic leverage. Now this particular one, Philippines scored a bit lower than Sri Lanka when it comes to debt, IMF, conditionality, economic dysfunctionality, as well as the amount of debt the nation has accumulated. So so that's that sub variable. And security and military interactions, the interactions between the military. Now, how much of external, for example, the military MOUs or the agreements that the country has signed. Sri Lanka, for example, the recent signing of the India-Sri Lanka MOU between military pacts. So Philippines, multiple military pacts with the United States. So these are important areas that we bring in to the sub-variable security military interaction. The next is the diplomatic balance. Your last is the geopolitical influence. So how well the nation's foreign policy has been balancing the big powers, the big power rivalries, and how they're sort of sustaining that. In Vietnam, we see a significant stability in this particular sub-variable. They are sustaining the stability, the balance. They call it the bamboo diplomacy, but which is swinging to the United States or China, the big powers, but then balancing. So even Philippines scored quite a good score there. The regime of President Marcos has been balancing quite well. So these add up to 100%. So what we do is we take this measure into the geopolitical influence. You can see the CPI. This is a known thing that we look at. So it's 2023, 24. There's not much of a difference, but most of the countries that are unstable, Myanmar, Afghanistan, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, they're highlighted in red. They were the countries that have sort of been significantly sort of been unstable. I mean, they've gone through public uprisings, large-scale corruption scandals, etc. But so economic crime, we try to sort of, the reason to broaden this is also the region. If you look at it, when it comes to narcotics, the flow of narcotics from Myanmar to these to sub-regional, I mean, the countries, Malaysia, the other Thailand. So you have cross-border when it comes to maritime as well as the land borders. So very vulnerable in terms of the customs regimes in place. And second is the virtual borders, which is very clear that you have a cyberspace used for economic crime. And both these areas, we try to sort of look at how the illicit actors are sort of engaging in these countries. They are smuggling goods and the nation's targeted. So what you see in this table is Myanmar, Thailand, Bangladesh, Laos, how this sort of triangulate these countries and see how the cross-border crime or economic crime is flowing in these, and social, political, economic impact. Afghanistan, India. So you see all these countries are very vulnerable in this economic crime So this is basically the index data which we have, and we have now published it. It's out there. What you see is the three countries highlighted are the three countries that have gone through the full cycle: Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So what you have out of this, you can see Philippines, CPI score is around 33. So economic crimes severity is around 7. Public response has been 6. Geopolitical influence has been again 6. So it's 69.2. The reason the public response has been 6 is also we take into consideration how the protest intensity was there about a week ago, right? So there was protest, but then can these protests sustain in a nation that is sort of, I mean, you have systemic corruption right throughout in many regimes. I was here in the Philippines in 2014 during the Aquino presidency. So corruption was again the main theme. So corruption has been a theme that has been discussed, and it is kind of ingrained into the society. Systemic corruption is a big point of discussion. But then when it comes to protests, can the protests sustain? And the NGOs who are backing or the non-governmental, so can they sort of sustain? So we see that they are unable to sustain in an environment such as Philippines. So Philippines is not getting into the high-risk band. What you see is, although they are closer to the high-risk band, they're not getting in. There are a few reasons behind it. One is the government has exposed the corruption. The president himself has exposed. The second is there's an attempt by the government again to investigate, as well as the protesters in the Philippines were not against the Marcos regime, but against the corruption scandal. So there are differences in most of these cases. You can't sort of equally see this is all this put in one basket that, okay, Nepal is similar to, no, they are not. So cultural contexts, as well as the people's grievances, the issues. So you have to consider most of them. So you can see the 9 countries at the top, starting from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia is quite high, very high when it comes to the risk. Then it comes, India is very vulnerable actually, so quite high in the risk index. So Indonesia, you can see right up there, so 75 mark. Myanmar, which is with the ongoing, the crisis as a civil war, very vulnerable. Nepal already, we projected Nepal actually before the crisis, and we got it right. Bangladesh also. So 2 countries we've got it right. So hopefully that, this is an indication to show that, okay, there is something wrong in this, basically the political environment in this country. So you need to work out something. Either there could be majoritarian governments in place, such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Nepal. So which is reluctant to listen to because they have the majority political power. But unfortunately, they fall very easily. You can see from these protests and everything, because of the anger of the youth as well as the new generation. You could see. So all this, what you see is. So it's quite most of those countries, even Thailand. You can see Thailand in number 68.9. So when the projection came in, so you can see a lot of instability there too. Corruption has again been the main issue in Thailand too. When it comes to countries such as Pakistan, again, corruption, right? So large-scale corruptions, as well as elite capture. So these are, I think, again, the test data that is that's now available. We trying to sort of change the way which, I mean, most of these indexes are owned and done at one particular place or an institute. We try to sort of change it at the Millennium Project. We try to, why don't we give the data set to the people or the institutions of those countries, such as in Philippines, the independent institution, we are speaking to a few of them, and let them improve the data set by bringing in the local data rather than sort of, we projecting, doing the data from Washington. So we want the local countries or independent institutions in those countries to own the data as well as work on the data. So it's kind of a people-centric approach, a new approach, and the data is out there, and it's a test case. So right now, but the report will be out in December by compiling all these measures in. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Asanga, for giving us a brief, brief introduction, pretty quite extensive as well, by explaining to us what the Economic Crime and Geopolitical Index is all about. What does it aim, what gap does it aim to fill compared to other existing in governance and corruption indices? Now is the time for us probably to have more conversation about this. And if there are questions from our friends online, feel free to put them in the chat. Or if you wish to ask a question directly, you may raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak so that we can see you and you can actually directly give your feedback or questions to Dr. Asanga. And I would also like to invite Jasril, from the Phil Foresight Institute, if you have some questions as well. But just to begin our conversation, you mentioned several times about, elite capture. Okay, that was the term that you used. And I would like to ask you particularly a question related to that. Probably I would just have to put some context into my question. And when you were explaining, the role of the elite, in the spectrum, in the entirety of why, societies gets worse when it comes to these indices, it reminds me of the book by Jared Diamond that was published in 2005 about his question, particularly, why do societies collapse? And it dawned upon me that according to Jared Diamond, there are 3-4 reasons, that drives a particular society collapse, at least in the context of the elite. And he termed this, used this terminology, which he called the elite mismanagement problem. And from his point of view, when he mentioned this concept of elite mismanagement program, he points out that elites often make decisions, on many types of governance issue, particularly, for example, the 3 variables that you've included in the ECGI and the indicators that you used to measure those indices. And he said this, that, 4 reasons. One is short-term self-interest. Elites profit from resource exploitation, even if it undermines long-term sustainability. Like, for example, in the case of deforestation, mining, flood control projects, in our case in the Philippines, among other things. That's one. Second, he said, is that when your elites are insulated from the consequences, right? They shield themselves from the worst effects, while ordinary people, including the middle class, suffer in the process. The third, he said, is that they cling to power. Since they have access, right, to power, to public policy, to funding and budget, they tend to cling to this, and they compete among themselves for, for power and resources. And the last one, he said, is resistance to reform. Right? Elites always benefit from the status quo, and therefore, he said, have a tendency to resist structural or systemic changes and to ignore. And that is what he called the elite mismanagement problem. Now, my question is, Asanga, if you can still hear me, I think I was disconnected a little bit. Okay, there you go. I'm sorry about that. There was a disconnection, probably because I was talking about some elite mismanagement problems here. So my question now, how can we use the ECGI index, to frame probably perhaps a conversation about the function and the role of the elite?
Well, Sherman, very important as well as a valuable question from you. Elite capture first came to my thinking back in 2021 when I went to Washington, D.C., started my work. I was assigned, I was doing some work with Carnegie, and it was Deepal's, one of his reports, which was published on elite capture. He tried to sort of understand the elite capture in Sri Lanka by the Chinese. So my first engagement or first bit of work on elite capture or capturability was on that particular dimension. But years after that, the collapse of Sri Lanka 22, then Bangladesh, and then followed by Nepal, I understood that the elite capture can be seen in various dimensions, not only in the Chinese dimension, the Chinese projects that elites are backing, as well as Chinese sort of buying local politicians, such as in Solomon Islands, be the timber industry, the telecommunications, or so various cases. But here is the thing: so corruption can come in. That's why the geopolitical vector is so important when it comes to, say, projects from all these powerful or the big nations that to geoeconomic, comes in geoeconomic intention to achieve a geostrategic means. So smaller countries or medium, size countries quickly get into sort of this kind of a trap, I would say. I see it in many countries. Now, this I have captured in my forthcoming book, which will be out in a few months, The Winds of Change. So in South and Southeast Asia, how India, China, work on regional diplomacy. So when they work on this extensive sort of geoeconomic, to achieve geoeconomic means, and to sort of targeting geostrategically, you see many projects, be it the port projects, terminal projects, water projects, power projects of the country. Now, one particular country I do is quite interesting, Cambodia, several times. So a scholar who does not want to be named, so I will not mention his name, mentions of the significant Chinese influence in that particular country. Their foreign policy seem to tilted towards it. But then, do we capture that? Is that a significant measure to understand how corrupt or how corrupt that society is, or the political system? So it's kind of a new initiative, I would say, to understand in a broader spectrum. Not targeting such as the elites who rule this country, they're all corrupt. No, not that. So what we want to understand is that have they been sort of been captured by the external forces, and whether the elites or where the youth call them the old guard, which they want to get rid of all these old guards. Now you see all these revolutions coming in, and they sort of distributed the wealth towards in terms of when it comes to inequality in the society. Now it's a very I would say salient as well as an important measure to understand the inequality of the society. So Nepal, for example, you have one billionaire. You have a few elites who are ruling the country, and when I interacted with even the billionaire in Nepal said, look, everything is okay. The society is happy. Everything is so fine. No, it was not the case. Now his factories have been burned. You can see a lot of the uprising turned into violence. The inequality or the distribution has not been equal. In Philippines, if somebody is working at a call center all their life, most of their lives, if they are, doing, I would say, you can't sustain a family from a small amount such as $400 for a month, which is not enough to sustain a family. So you need to see all these. I think the governments, for the government, it's an eye opener too, to understand and sort of work with the society much more and sort of listen to what's going on in the society. Actually, when you're a majoritarian government, it's quite difficult in a situation. But all three cases, in what we understood was they never wanted to listen. They implemented many reforms. Supporting the elites or the political elite circle, be it in Sri Lanka, the two brothers or their group, or so they're not sort of including the others in the society. So this was an anger for most in the society that we saw. So you could see this also probably in many ASEAN countries also. So it's important to understand that, and I think the measure would give some sort of indication. Sherman.
Thank you very much, Asanga. So again, if you have some questions and feedback, please raise your virtual hand, and you can send us your question as well. There is a wonderful question here from Parikshit Mukesh. His question is, if economic crime is a symptom of weak governance, what would a future system look like where transparency itself becomes a national asset, measurable and tradable like GDP? And a follow-up question is, can we design a foresight-based early warning systems that predict international corruption before it happens using behavioral and financial pattern recognition? So the first question is about transparency as a national asset and tradable like GDP. And the second question is about a foresight-based informed early warning system.
Now, clearly, transparency was one of the main issues. It's of course linked with corruption. We should look at transparency in a very different manner. We've been sort of dealing with this for many years, looking at the CPI index and all. But have we sort of achieved much as a society, or have we progressed? No. So if you look at the autocratic rule in many countries who have changed constitutions, changed independent institutions, intervened in corruption scandals. In Sri Lanka, there was a bit of a, it was until this regime came, the new regime, it was kind of they look at it in a very sarcastic manner that no presidents would be arrested in this country, no ministers, very senior ministers. Only the people in the lower, strata of the society always get arrested. The drug peddlers, the smaller. But where are these big people? Where are not getting arrested for? So it's kind of transparency has been debatable, I would say, a discussion point in each society that have sort of traveled to many countries, more than, I would say, close to 40 nations. But I see transparency very, very, even in the United States right now. So the autocratic grip, which is suppressing democratic norms, has sort of narrated transparency in their own way, which has become a threat to our societies. So it's important that we sort of bring this measure and strengthen it when a time like this that we live, where you see leaders not much discussing about transparency or accountability, when institutions have been shut, when independent investigations are no more, So it's important that the civil society actors, young leaders, Gen Z leaders discuss transparency. So it's kind of I would say the index would give some sort of a boost for the youth to sort of join the economic crime, the geopolitical centers in various countries. Now we're planning to sort of set up in these countries. Yeah. So the on the second question, Sherman, if you could kindly repeat the second question.
Yes. Can we design foresight-based early warning system that predict institutional corruption before it happens using behavioral and financial pattern recognition?
Yes, that's an attempt. I mentioned about behavioral psychology. So I think it's that's a very important area that we should explore. Here in Philippines, I met the Stanford scholar here, so she's pretty much ready to work on it. There are many out there to work on this area, so it's important to understand the social norms, behavioral patterns, so to project or forecast. Look at this is the real anger, or this is the issue of the society. There are many narratives on breakup of the systems that we live, the traditional systems, because of social media, and the social media does not give us that sort of the glue which holds us to these traditional institutions in our societies. So this is the issue. But I think you need to do more sort of study on these areas. And it's kind of I think it's important that we do this and sort of forecast on the behavioral side, understanding the behavioral side.
Yes, that's a pretty interesting case, right? Like when you create some sort of approaches or mechanism wherein you can in fact actually predict the tendency to do some correct types of activities. In fact, there was a recent reform, probably that will be pursued by our secretary currently of the Department of Public Highways, is that, to make all bidding processes and activities publicly accessible online. Not only transparency in terms of, the documentation, the administrative aspects, including the process of bidding.
Yeah,
In fact,
it's a yes, Sherman. That's transparency in terms of tendering has been, even in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, many other countries. People want this. When it comes to asset declarations of politicians, people want it. Although they want this, but it's not. Governments have been very slow. They have been very slow in sort of coming out with results, like results that the society accepts. So it is, it's not about declaration of assets of each and every politicians. It's about the asset growth of these politicians over the years. That's what the youth wants to know. So youth are quite smart nowadays because of social media, because you have so it's kind of a window that they have. Okay, look, they know what's out there, what's happening in the world. This index was, when we launched this index, I think we launched at the right time, Sherman, because just after Nepal. If we waited till December, I think we wouldn't have got this tremendous sort of I would say feedback from the different societies, especially from Philippines, Thailand, many other countries. So it shows that there's an interest in these societies who wants to work. So we can help as academics, as think tankers, to get together. If we have done some scaling mistakes in our rankings, in our scoring, we can improve. We are there to sort of learn, improve. That's the process. Because all these indexes, if you look at it, the global competitiveness index, they're projected, but have they got it right? And no, it's not. It's just a perception, or just seeing it that they would get there. Bangladesh was a very interesting case. Just before the uprising, we had with the very senior officials in Bangladesh, military, intelligence. This was on the record meeting. So at that time I was working as a technical advisor to IMF. So when I said, can something like Sri Lanka happen in Bangladesh, they all rejected it. They said impossible, based on one premise, that is, we don't have a place. So they don't have a single place to demonstrate. Like in Sri Lanka, they had a ground to protest, which was a popular ground. They said, no, we don't have a location as such, so it's impossible. And the intelligence is much ahead, or the military, or so see what happened. They were all proven wrong. So I think it's time that we put that hubris aside, that you understand what's going on in the ground.
Yes, given the fact that you also highlighted the role of the youth, right, in this evolving situation, around Southeast Asia, and at least for me, the Philippines case, I would like to call on Jezreel, because he belongs to that generation. Jezreel, he's currently the director of the Foresight Institute. Jezreel, if you are there, do you want to pose a question to Asanga? Is Jezreel there?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, yes, please. And then you can probably perhaps show yourself as well so that we can see you in the screen.
Okay, sir. So for me, sir, so what will be your message, sir, for the Filipino youth as we face these challenging times of rampant corruption in our country?
My message is basically to work with the government, the institutions, strengthen it much as possible. Of course, demonstrations. President Marcos also has mentioned the importance of demonstrations, and he revealed the corruption case on the flood. So I think it's important to work with the government rather than going through the full cycle, like in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or Nepal, full cycle, you lose a lot when you do the full change. For example, like the regime changes, building up, burning properties, that when it comes to Nepal, Bangladesh. So, and also what you expect, you won't get it at once, right? So your demands, it takes years. Now, Sri Lankan case from 2022, we released the diagnostic report in 2023, the IMF diagnostic. When we did the diagnostic, it took us 1 year to understand what really went wrong in Sri Lanka. And so I was part of that team. So when you understood the systemic corruption, governance failures, multiple sort of areas. So it's important that you avoid it. You avoid the full sort of cycle, because the investment to come back is much more. So it's important that you correct it rather than you reset it. I know the youth in most of these countries want something fresh, something new, but most of these countries have failed to deliver that also. You can't get everything at once, so it's a process. So sometimes it takes 4 years, sometimes it will take 5 years, sometimes elections were delayed in Sri Lanka for a long time. We had elections in 2024, 22 was uprising. Bangladesh still has not had elections. Nepal probably does not have the funds or the institutions now in place. So because the anger of the youth and all that, the protests turn into violence and all that, so there's a lot of losses. So we are trying to avoid that, the full cycle. The risk gives the youth to understand, look, you are at a high risk. Maybe Philippines, you are reaching there. So how do we not get there? The ones who are in the high risk should be able to sort of move to low risk. I mean, working towards making your country medium or lower. Singapore, a very successful case we saw in our index, has managed to communicate extremely well with their people, although it's a smaller country, as it said, but then you have very maturity in dealing when it comes to corruption issues, transparency, as well as communications. And strong institutions. So these are that's the strength of us of a better. So the message to the youth is actually working towards improving in multiple ways rather than resetting.
Yes, and just an update news that I've seen this morning is there is a particular senator that's now calling for a snap election in the Philippines. But apparently there is this statement going on in media that we don't actually support the snap election. We want these people be responsible and accountable, so we are looking into prison term. It's not a snap election for politicians who are accountable, right? So we
Yeah.
will see how this unfolds, right? Whether there will be a snap
Yeah.
election or not, or that there will be cases filed against these people who are responsible, because as far as the public is concerned, corruption is so unimaginable. It's crazy. So I would say the public intellectual also has to participate and engage, because sometimes the elite, because of the access to political spaces that they have, it's so deep that they get to shape what the political narrative is. And now they are making such kind of proposal. But apparently, as far as governance is concerned, particularly to the idea of that the public office is a public trust, public intellectuals, I'm not sure how huge it is. I've seen some of colleagues as well who doesn't support that idea that, accountability must come first and not snap election. And with that, probably we can have one more question or probably comment from the audience. If you wish to ask a question directly to Dr. Asanga before we close this session. Anyone?
Just want to
Sure,
make a
Asanga.
comment on what you said, Sherman. So even the military coup, which has been discussed, and many media and all. So these things, you don't know what you want. I mean, who would be the next leader? So I mean, even the youth in many of these uprisings and all that, they don't understand what is the next step. So they're kind of lost in there. So it's kind of important to understand, like, okay, if you go through this whole snap elections, military coups, all that, how much suffering would a nation go through? How much of, so it's important that this indication, risk indicator, gives a perception like, okay, here is it. So how do you avoid it? And that's important.
Yes, probably we're about to end this session. Any concluding notes from you, Asanga?
Yes, so in the Philippines, I'm quite sort of, I would say, with my discussion with the government officials, I'm kind of, I don't see a full-scale thing. I mean, it's not Bangladesh, not Nepal. It's definitely clearly out of that. So you see a lot of maturity, a lot of, they have gone through many rounds of corruption, systemic corruption, but then I think the importance of resilience is also as a society, to fight corruption. How do we make it better? What the president is actually saying. So how to make things better? So youth should join to make it better. The institutions make it more stronger. I think that's my sort of last message to not only Philippines but also many other nations. So, and also to join contributing to our index. You can be part of the local chapters that we have established in the Millennium Project, or our South Asia Foresight Network. So contribute and be part of it. So I invite you.
Thank you very much, Asanga. And as we end this session, of course, embarking from what Asanga just shared, that as far as I'm concerned, one thing becomes clear, that economic crime is not just about the numbers really, right? But it gives us an idea, a very strong data and evidence to facilitate conversation and, project possibilities. And it's really about, if you come to think of it, as far as the society is concerned, it is a conversation, an issue of power. It is an issue of ensuring, among other things, it's not just about, of course, one thing also that I understand is that the index really is not about predicting collapse. That is not its aim. But really, among other things, is to prevent it. And it also emphasizes that if, how society evolves in the process, it points out about the importance and significance of the very choices that societies make. The Economic Crime and Geopolitical Index challenges us how to see corruption and, as mentioned as well, the role of the elite in reshaping governance, in strengthening or probably weakening democracy and threatening the stability not just to our nations but across the region. But of course, the ECGI, the way I look at it and I understand it, is that it gives us the tool to anticipate and to imagine alternatives. We need to have a conversation. And let this conversation also reminds us that anticipatory governance is not really about predicting the future. It's not just about preventing it, but it's really about also fostering accountability, transparency, and our responsibilities to ensure that our democratic institution make sense of what it matters most. And for me, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to public office and for those who are working in our bureaucratic institution at some point in my life, I also work in the government. I think what is essential is integrity, because integrity is the foundation of our collective security. Without that, societies collapse, democratic institution collapse. Again, thank you very much, Asanga, for your time and for the opportunity to discuss this more extensively. And to all of you who participated here today, if you want to reach out and continue this conversation, let us know. We hope we can invite Asanga again in the future and for taking part in this dialogue towards a more responsible democracy and a nation state that serves our interests and a citizenry that learns to commit to transformation and for the public welfare and good of all. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po at magkita-kita po tayo sa susunod na UNESCO Chair Talk. Thank you very much, Asanga.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.